Hey, New Yorkers. My name's Amanda Malillo, and I'm the Deputy Director of Public Affairs at the New York City Campaign Finance Board, where I oversee voter education and engagement efforts through NYC Votes. New Yorkers want a say in what affects their neighborhoods, whether that's schools, jobs, or their health and safety. Yet statistics show that political participation and voter turnout is extremely low. So we have to ask, why aren't voters engaging in the process and showing up at the polls? My guest has dedicated himself to the fight to ensure that all voters have access. I'm happy to introduce Perry Grossman, who is a senior staff attorney for the Voting Rights Project at the New York Civil Liberties Union. Welcome, Perry.
Hi, Amanda. It's a pleasure to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit about the work that you do?
Sure. So in the New York Civil Liberties Union, I do all voting rights work all the time. A lot of my work is litigation. So I'm in the courts trying to represent voters to make access to the right to cast a meaningful ballot easier. I do legislative work. So I work with my colleagues to help craft and push for laws to make our democracy stronger. And I do some field work as well. So I'm out there helping to organize and make sure that New Yorkers are registered and well-educated about the issues and out casting their ballots.
That's awesome. So something we found when the CFB analyzed the voting patterns from 2008 to 2018, we gave every voter in New York City a voter participation score based on how many elections they were eligible to vote in and how many they actually voted in. We found that 21% of people didn't vote in a single election in the past decade. Why do you think people aren't voting?
It's a really good question, Amanda. There's so many different reasons that people aren't voting, and the upside is I think they're all curable. But we make it unusually hard to vote in New York State, right? Voter registration is not easy. We have a long registration deadline. We don't have online registration. We only introduced early voting for the first time last year, right? Most states have early voting. I think we were like number 38 to join that course. We don't have no excuse absentee balloting, right? So it's not easy to vote by mail. And as we're noticing this year, when everybody kind of needs to vote by mail in order to vote safely, it's been a challenge to scale up. It's important, and I'm glad that we're doing it, but it's been a challenge. And because we've made absentee ballots hard to get by making voters apply for them and state a good cause to receive one, that's depressed turnout as well. And of course, we've got a lot of inequality in this state, and poverty, an achievement gap, low educational attainment, the failure to campaign for the votes of minority voters to really make an effort to bring them into the political process. All of those things are going to depress turnout in a city where we have a tremendous amount of inequality and people lead very, very busy lives. So we've got to make voting as easy as possible so that people really have an opportunity to participate.
I think that really speaks to what we found in our research was that there are real turnout disparities around the city. And even if we look at a borough level, Manhattan had the highest voter participation score, while the Bronx had the lowest score. And we're also seeing that the neighborhoods being hardest hit by COVID right now are the neighborhoods with historically low turnout. You spoke a little bit about achievement gap and socioeconomic factors. How do you think these play together in terms of voter turnout and the ease of access to the polls?
I mean, they're so important, right? I mean, first of all, the people who tend to be on the margins of society are the impoverished, immigrant communities of color. They have the hardest time getting a voice heard, so that voting is conducive to them, right? The Bronx had a really terrible early voting plan in 2019. I mean, granted, glad we had early voting at all, but you had no early voting sites south of 161st Street or west of the Bronx River Parkway. That's a huge swath of the Bronx right there. You had sites that weren't placed in such a way that they fit into people's daily lives. We need to find a way to make voting an easy habit for people to acquire. We don't always do a great job going into poor communities and communities of color and really getting to understand what they need in order to be the most active and effective possible citizens they can be. So unfortunately, a lot of the problems that keep those communities from being well heard on other issues also infect their ability to receive the accommodations they need to be high propensity voters like we see in wealthy and much whiter neighborhoods in Manhattan.
We're seeing a lot of changes that you referenced before happening right now to change the voting process during COVID. But what are the things we need to do to permanently make sure that people can have an easier time voting?
Oh, it's a really good question. The fact is that COVID is kind of a real stress test for so much of our policy framework generally, but especially for voting. And some of the things that have been adapted are just good practices that we should have access to always, right? I mean, first of all, you shouldn't need good cause to get an absentee ballot. Anybody should be able to vote by mail. You should be able to apply for it online. You shouldn't need a wet signature on a piece of paper. You know, among other things, it's also really important that little things matter, right? Like postage on return ballots, right? So thanks to the governor's executive order, every absentee ballot comes with postage paid, but that's not normal, right? That needs to happen more often. That's a poll tax. You're asking people to go out and spend money in order to get themselves counted this year. These are all kinds of little things that we could be doing, but a really huge one is voter registration. Voter registration since COVID has been such a problem because we can't go out and do the in-person organizing that usually gets voter registration forms in the door. And we don't have access to an online registration system yet. I know one's been built for New York City. It would be great if the Board of Elections would adopt it, especially this year, because we need people who haven't been able to get that outreach from voter education groups to have an easier time connecting digitally to the process so that they can participate this year as well.
I mean, you mentioned lack of online registration and that so much of our election system is still really paper-based, which in a day and age where we're generally transitioning to going electronic, but especially now in the middle of a pandemic, it's even more problematic. So the only way New Yorkers can register online is if they are a DMV customer, if they have a driver's license or a state-issued ID. By tying online registration to the DMV specifically, like, who does that create barriers for?
Creates barriers for anyone who lives in New York City and doesn't have a reason to have to schlep themselves to the DMV. It hurts the people who don't interact with the DMV, and that's New York City residents more than anybody else. I think something close to like 30% of all voter registration forms in the state of New York come through the DMV, but that number drops below 15% in New York City, right? So I'm glad that we have a DMV system, but it shouldn't be the only system. We need portals for every voter, easy for every voter to access to be able to register online. Now, there's a real tension between wanting to digitize our democracy and also security, right? So we're not saying that people should be voting online yet, or it's important to have paper ballots and paper trails so that we know what's going on. But voter registration is something that really needs to be easy and available for everybody at any time. And online voting registration would really make that a big difference.
What can individual New Yorkers do if they care about making these changes to our voting process?
Oh man! So every time I get that question, I try to work backwards, right? Because the first thing is, put the oxygen mask on, right? You got to make sure that you are registered and that you vote. And then you got to make sure that everybody registers and vote. And then you can worry about everybody you don't know registering and voting. But if you've already made sure that your registration is current, that you're ready to vote, and your family and your friends, you can lobby. You can be a really effective lobbyist. Write letters to your assembly member, your senator, the governor, and reach out to the people around you. It's really hard for groups to organize right now. I mean, granted, we're seeing these amazing protests out in the street, and that's spectacular. But we also have trouble making sure, without close contact with people, that everybody's registered. So check with the people you come in contact with. Just ask them if they're registered, and if they're not, let them know that all they can go get a form sent to them. They call up the BOE, they'll get a postage paid application to register to vote, and then remind people to go vote.
I mean, the good news, I guess, is we're making some progress on voting reform, even though it feels like it's not happening fast enough. And we're lucky to have people like you at the forefront taking this fight from the streets to the legislature to the courts. So thank you for joining me today.
Well, I think we're lucky to have you, Amanda. And I appreciate what NYC Votes and the Campaign Finance Board do. So thanks to you and your colleagues for everything you do for New York voters.
My fellow New Yorkers, for election updates, you can text Vote Smart to 917-979-6377. And don't forget to vote in the primary election on June 23rd. Thanks for watching today.